Really want to welcome everyone for coming today. I know that, you probably didn't have much of a choice as, you're coming here for class, but it really is important that you're here. Kati and I have known each other for about 6 or 7 years as I've invited her to schools to talk with students. Remembering and trying to study the Holocaust can be very difficult. It defies logic. It's emotionally very difficult to understand. You've read Elie Wiesel's work, Night, I think in middle school. You've recently studied the Holocaust and World War II in your classes. But it's one thing to study it. It's another thing to actually hear from someone who was there. I heard about the Holocaust from my father. He grew up in Poland. And my grandparents grew up in Nazi-occupied Poland. They passed their stories on to him. He passed his stories on to me, and I'm passing them on to you. They survived. It's the passing on of stories that's really important about today. And I think it's also important that we're gathered here together to hear from someone who was there. Kati Preston is a Holocaust survivor. She was there. She is a witness. And after today, everyone in here becomes a witness to her story. And as we leave here, the important thing to remember is that when we try to stop hate in the world, when we declare never again, it's not up to anyone above us. It's really up to us. And that's why she's here today, and that's what she's going to tell you. So it is my honor, it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome my dear friend, Kati Preston.
I almost read his file. Okay. Hi, guys. My name is Kati, and I don't like people introducing me because I prefer to do it myself. It's not an ego trip. However, I started speaking a few years ago because I had a grandchild in a middle school in Manchester, and she hadn't heard anything about the Holocaust. And I decided to go and speak because I felt that perhaps they should hear about it. And I got totally hooked. This was 8th grade, and I really enjoyed myself. They were like half angels, half devils, these kids. And I really felt that I touched them. And I haven't stopped speaking. I now speak in colleges and in high schools and in libraries and churches. I like speaking in churches because people go to church to be good, essentially. So you're sort of halfway there. But I speak in all kinds of venues. The only thing I hate doing is Monday mornings in colleges because they're all hungover. They all sleep. They all sleep, and I sort of bang the table, and they all sit up and look at it, like, oh, yes, of course, never mind. No college Monday morning. But I feel that it's very important to speak because there are voices that say that it didn't happen. I personally was not in a concentration camp. I'm a child survivor. I was hidden as a child, but I went through right through the whole thing. And when I was a child, all this happened when I was around between 4 and 5, and it happened in Transylvania. Now, Transylvania is where the vampires come from, okay? The vampires exist, no, but Transylvania does. And it's a place which is between Hungary and Romania, which keeps changing nationalities. Every time there's a war, somebody else gets it. And I come from a small town. It was about the size of Concord, New Hampshire. Nice little town, very prosperous. We even had an opera house. It had several churches, several cinemas, and it had a strange mix of people. Some were Hungarians, some were Romanians, a large Jewish community, and an awful lot of gypsies who were also part of it. And you read Elie Wiesel. His town was about I would say 50 miles from my town. It was the same sort of atmosphere. My parents for those times were very unusual because my father was a Jew and my mother was a Catholic, and they didn't intermarry. That was totally frowned upon. It was a big scandal, it just wasn't done. And they were promptly disowned by both their families because it was unheard of. And my mother converted to Judaism, but they didn't really practice very much. I remember her occasionally on a Friday night lighting a candle and muttering things in a strange tongue. I thought she was doing magic. I wasn't sure what it was. But at any rate, they allowed me always to have a Christmas tree. Because they were fairly secular, I was allowed to have a Christmas tree because it was such a beautiful holiday. And they had very high ceilings, and there was always a huge Christmas tree. And my parents let me have these holidays because they wanted me to take part in society in general. And they were very well off for those days. My mother was a dressmaker. In those days, people didn't buy clothes in a shop. They bought a piece of cloth and they went to a dressmaker to have it designed and made into a dress. And she had 40 girls working for her. It was a big business. My father had a fish wholesale business. There was a river that went through the town, and he had great big crates of live fish that he would wholesale. There were fish with long whiskers. They looked like old peasants. And we always had one in the bath swimming around because we ate a lot of them. And I remember as a kid going to talk to the fish because I was kind of sorry for it. And I would say, well, look, I'm sorry we're going to eat you, but you're going to taste so good. Trying to cheer it up, getting rid of my guilt that way. And I had an incredible childhood. I had absolutely everything. Because my parents were well off and I was an only child, I was a child of privilege. I had everything. I had toys, and I had a beautiful bedroom with silk hangings on the bed and lines of bookcases on both walls full of toys, every imaginable toy. I had everything, and I was spoiled rotten, constantly being patted on the head. They were telling me how wonderful I was and how beautiful I was, and I had beautiful clothes, and my hair was always perfect. And I thought I was the center of the universe. So one Christmas, I remember, as usual, every Christmas we used to have little candles on the trees, and they would light the candles. And you know what happens when you light a candle on a fir tree? Fire. Every Christmas we had a fire. But they had buckets of water standing next to the tree. They would throw it on the fire. And I still remember the wonderful smell of burning Christmas trees. But it was very, very nice. Nothing wrong with it. And this one Christmas, one of the maids decided to take me to the local church to show me the nativity scene. And I stole baby Jesus. I stuck him under my coat, and I went home, and my mother takes my coat off, and she says, oh my God, they're going to say that the Jews are stealing Jesus. So she says, you take her back there, and she has to apologize to the priest. And I was dragged back there, sort of petrified. And there was this gentleman, this priest, very tall, skinny guy. He had a nose like a toucan. I've never seen a nose like that. And long, bony finger that he waved at me. And he was telling me, oh, go to hell for stealing Jesus. I was so terrified. I never wanted to go anywhere near a church. I was petrified. And I was crying, and I gave Jesus back. But you know, to this day, every time I go past one of those places, I'm so tempted. So if you read about an old woman stealing baby Jesus, it would be me. I have to do it. So at this point, my parents decided that they had a totally out of control 4.5-year-old, and they got me a governess. Boy, did they get me a governess. Fräulein, which is Miss in German, she came to us from Austria, and I don't think she could smile. I've never seen her smile. She had no lips. She had a mouth like sort of a slash and a bun on her head, and she was very, very, very strict. I had to sit at the table with a hard-boiled egg under each armpit so that I wouldn't flap my wings. And she tied a string around my neck and around my waist to the chair behind so that I wouldn't slouch. But look, it worked. I have good posture. It really worked. And I must say, she did, in the short time she was with us, 6 months, she taught me to read, write, and speak German, which was quite a big deal. Excuse me. Somebody asked me what's in the bottle. I tell them vodka. I wish. However, this governess was the bane of my life. I hated her, and I kept telling my father, I don't like Fräulein. And he said, no, you don't understand. If you want to be a lady, if you want to be a lady from a good family, you have to have an education like this. And so she used to take me for walks. I had to wear a hat and gloves. I wasn't allowed to play with the children in the street. And the only child I was allowed to play with was a little boy down the road who had big blue eyes and blonde curly hair, and he was absolutely adorable. And we would play outside the opera house, running up and down the driveway, and the game was that we ran fast, and when I caught him, I kissed him, and I ran really fast a lot. And I kept pestering this poor boy. I still remember him wiping his little face. But that was my only enjoyment with Fräulein. And she used to read me these dreadful stories. You know, the Grimm brothers, I think it should be outlawed. I think it's child abuse. I really do. You know, little kids who get their fingers cut off because their nails are too long, and little girls who get burnt up because they play with matches. Anyway, she terrorized me. She was a bitch. Well, I'm sure you've heard worse words than this, I'm sure. But anyhow, this woman was really a black spot in my childhood. But I was really my daddy's little girl. You know, any of you girls who love your father will understand that incredible peace and security that you feel around your father. I remember my father as a tall, handsome, dark-haired man, always laughed a lot, threw his hair back. He always had a big white scarf trailing behind him. I think he was a bit flamboyant, but he was such a presence in my life, and he was so kind. And in those days, children were not explained things. They were told, go here, do that, do this, but he would sit me down and he would explain things to me. And when I went for walks with Fräulein, he gave me coins to give to the poor. And I said, well, what if they don't need it? He says, no, you don't understand. It's not up to you to judge who needs something. If somebody's begging, it's your job to try and help them. Because your parents are rich, it doesn't make you any better than any one of those beggars. And at this point, they decided to send me to a Jewish kindergarten for 2 half days a week so that I would learn something about my Jewish heritage. But that didn't work too well because all I did at the kindergarten is pester the little boy who happened to be Jewish. He was there too. And there were 52 kids in this kindergarten, and there was only 2 of us who survived. And funnily enough, well, not funny, but later, 50 years later, I met the other person who survived. I'll tell you later. And then things started to change. You know, a lot of times kids ask me, well, not high school, but younger kids ask me, well, why did the Jews go and why did they agree to go to the camps? It wasn't like that. It was a gradual erosion of freedom. They took things away gradually. They started off by not allowing Jews to go to college. Jews couldn't teach in colleges. Jews couldn't teach in high school. Jews weren't allowed to go to high school anymore. And then they weren't allowed to go to elementary school either, unless it was a Jewish school. Jewish doctors were not allowed to treat non-Jews. And then no woman under the age of 45 was allowed to work in a Jewish household. So a lot of people left our house. All the girls who worked for my mother, the maids, everybody who was young enough to be under 45 had to leave, and suddenly everybody was gone. And to my joy, Fräulein left. That was wonderful. I didn't wash my hands for 3 weeks. It was great. I really, really was very happy about that. But I noticed that things were not the same. My mother, who was always a happy person, stopped laughing, and she always had red eyes from crying. And every time I came into the room, people would stop talking, and there was a lot of whispering going on. And I didn't quite understand what was going on. But by this time, you know, the big Jewish family forgave my parents, and they would come and have dinner with us. And there would be a long table, almost as long as this room is wide. There were 28 members in that family. I'm the only one who's alive. And they would come and have dinner. And I had aunts and cousins and all kinds of relatives, and they were all older than me. And so, of course, being the youngest, again, I was spoiled and being patted on the head, and I was made to say things in German, and everybody was oohing and aahing, how wonderful and how clever. But at one point, these dinners became very dark. People didn't laugh anymore. They were whispering, they were worried, and I didn't know what went on. And at this point, my mother came to me and said, I have a present for you. And she brought me this beautiful yellow star that she made out of gold material, and she sewed it onto my blue coat. And I was so proud of this star, because little girls like shiny things. And I thought this star was wonderful, nice and big and gaudy. And she says, let's go and get some pastries. So we walk down the street, and the man comes opposite, and he stops, and he looks at me. And I look up at him, sort of expecting a compliment. And he spits in my face, and the spit runs down my face onto the star. And I look up at my mother and I say, he hates stars. Never thinking that it wasn't the star he hated, it was me. And my mother, who normally would protect me, started shushing me, grabbed me by the hand and dragged me home. And she says, no, darling, it's not the star. He hates you because you're a Jew. And I said, well, then maybe I shouldn't wear the star. She says, you have to. You have to wear the star. You're not allowed to go out without the star. I said, but then people will spit on me. The logic was mine, but not possible to change anything. And the Hungarian authorities were very smart. They told the Jews to register for their own protection with the police. So they knew where everybody lived, how many in each household. They were very obedient. The Hungarian Jews were very assimilated, and they were very trusting of the authorities. And at this point, the Hungarian authorities took an old part of town and built a huge wall around it with barbed wire on top. It was a ghetto. The ghetto is an Italian word, which means foundry. It was originally in Venice. In the Middle Ages, they had an old metal foundry, which they allowed the Jews to live in, and the Jews had to be interned at night. They weren't allowed to go outside except during the day, and that's where the word ghetto comes from. It's still there. There's a thing called Vecchio Ghetto, and you can go and visit it in Venice. And they started rounding up the Jews. And I remember the day my father left. He had a little suitcase, and he and my mother were holding each other, sobbing. And I sort of wormed my way between them because I had to be part of everything. And I assumed my father was just going on a business trip. He'd been away before. I didn't see why everybody was all upset because he had a suitcase. And then he left. And then there was a lot of noise, and our house overlooked a big street and the river, and they were rounding up the people, and there was a lot of commotion. There were soldiers in green uniforms, black feathers in their hats, and they were beating the people, and they were using bayonets and guns and whips, and they started putting people onto carts and sort of trucks, but open trucks. And people were falling, and they were being kicked and beaten. There was a lot of screaming. And suddenly they all left, and it was quiet. But all the dogs and the cats that these people had, they didn't have time to take care of them. So all these animals were left behind. And I remember as a kid being very upset about this, and I was running around trying to feed all these dogs. You see, I stayed home because my mother, although she was converted to Judaism, didn't have to go to the camps because they considered Jews by blood, not by religion so much. And so her blood wasn't tainted, but mine was because I was half Jewish. In fact, if you even had one Jewish grandparent, you had to go. And obviously, I was on the list, and my mother had to hide me. She didn't let me go near the window. I wasn't allowed to skip or run in the apartment because people underneath would hear me. And I had a miserable time because every time anybody came, I had to scooch under one of the beds. And so I was hidden in the apartment until this woman came to see my mother. We used to buy milk like everybody else, not in a shop. The farmer would come with a horse and cart with big vats of milk, and you would run downstairs with a dish, and they would ladle out the milk, and that's how you bought your milk. And this young woman, she was a young Christian girl, a very simple girl, had been an orphan, and when she got married, my mother made her a wedding dress, and she never forgot. And when she heard that they're rounding up the Jews, knowing that my mother married a Jew, came to see my mother, and she said, "Where's the child?" And my mother says, "I'm hiding her." She says, no, give her to me. I'll take her to my farm, and she'll be safe there because, you know, nobody will find her on the farm. And my mother reluctantly gave me to her, and I was very happy to go because I was fed up being locked up, and I thought, a farm, great, I'll be able to play with children, and there will be puppies and kittens and freedom. So I went very happily with this woman, sat on the cart. She had a cart with one horse, and there was like a wooden bench, and I sat on the bench with her, and we drove for quite a long time. It seemed long anyway to me. And she even let me hold the reins a few minutes. I was very happy. And we got to her house, and her farm was on the side of a hill. The house was there, and as you entered the gates, to the left was a small barn with a pitch roof with two stalls, one for the horse and one for the cow. And they had hay above it, because in those days they used to throw the hay up with a hay fork, not bales. And I hop out of the cart and start going towards her house, and she says, no, you're not going to the house, you're going there. And I said, why? She says, because people are trying to kill you. You must realize people want to kill you. I have to hide you. And I didn't believe her. I mean, you know, a 5-year-old doesn't understand what it means to die. I mean, none of us do. Every one of us in this room is going to die, but none of us think about that. I mean, I totally ignored death. I'm 80, and I never think about it because, of course, it's not going to happen to me. It happens to someone else, but not me. And I was a kid. I mean, I said to this woman, why are you saying these things? And I was being quite bratty. But nevertheless, she took me upstairs on these rickety stairs into this barn, and she had some blankets there for me, and she says, you're going to sleep here tonight. And it started getting dark. And I was frightened because going from my existence as a little princess to this dingy, smelly barn, and she left me there, and it was getting dark, and there was rustling in the hay, there were mice, and there were big black spiders, and I was cringing, and I cried and cried and cried, and eventually I fell asleep crying. And she was very kind to me. She would come every day, bring me food, and occasionally she smuggled me up to her house to bathe me. But you know, it's amazing how you can get used to things. And I got quite used to being there. I used to the fact that I wasn't allowed out. I got used to the fact that I was alone. I played with a straw. I made a doll out of some straw. They wouldn't let me have toys because they were afraid somebody might find it. And so I tried to catch a mouse, to befriend a mouse, couldn't. And then I managed to catch one of the big black spiders, and I tied the string to his leg, and now I had a pet, but the leg came off. And then I felt guilty, so no more spiders. But this is how I spent my life there. I was there a whole 3 months. And it's amazing. When I think about it now, I can't imagine today a 5-year-old sitting still for 5 minutes, let alone being hidden in an attic. I mean, I raised 4 sons. They would have been dead the first week. They would have run around. But there I was, and she told me, her name was Elizabeth, Erzsébet in Hungarian. She told me that if anybody came, I had to make myself very small and hide under the hay and not scream and not cry. And I still didn't believe her, but one morning, very early, about 6 in the morning, I would say, I look through the cracks of the barn, and I see 3 soldiers, again in those green uniforms with the black feathers. They had big guns with bayonets, and they're slapping this poor woman around. There's blood pouring out of her nose, and they keep punching and slapping her. Where's the Jew? Where's the Jew? You're hiding a Jew. We know you're hiding a Jew. Where's the Jew? She says, there's no Jew. Look at my house. So they went up to her house, and they ransacked her house. They threw dishes out the window, and they were breaking things. They were so angry that there was no Jew there. And then they left, and as they went past the barn, one of them stopped and says, hey, wait a minute. Let's look in this barn. And I remember the noise their boots made coming up the rickety stairs. And I scooched under one of the eaves and pulled the hay over me, and I made myself really, really small, and I shut my eyes really tight, because you think that if you don't see someone, they won't see you. But I was petrified, and I was so frightened because my heart was beating so loudly, I thought it would give me away. It sounded to me like a drum. And I was lying there, and these guys were using their bayonets to look through the hay, and they got closer and closer, and then I opened an eye, and I see this boot next to my face, and then the bayonet comes down about an inch from my face, and it gets stuck in the wood. And I remember the noise it made as he pulled it out, and then they left. And I was so frightened that I couldn't move. Eventually, Elizabeth came, and she says, it's okay, they're gone, you can get up. I couldn't stand up, I couldn't talk. I wasn't able to talk for about a day or 2, and I was trembling the whole time, and I no longer argued with her. I then realized what it means to die. It means that somebody's going to stick a knife in your head. It was very graphic. And at this point, my mother was arrested because we were all on the list, and they knew that she must have done something. Where is the child? And I don't know what they did to her, because she didn't tell me. She wouldn't tell me. She said it was far too humiliating, but I never saw her laugh after that. And then she managed to smuggle my father out of the ghetto by paying some soldiers with some gold coins that she had. And he was going to walk across to Romania, which was very close to the border, and save himself. And he wanted to come and see me before he left. He said, look, I love the child. She's dependent on me. I don't want her to think I've abandoned her. I want to explain to her that it's the war, and it will be a little while before I come back, and I want her to be secure. And my mother said to him, no, please don't go, please don't go, but he wouldn't listen. And he walked late at night with a little bag on his back, and he walked to the farm, and they caught him outside the farm's gate. They must have been watching the farm. And they arrested him, and they took him back to the ghetto, and he was deported to Auschwitz the next morning. And you know, to this day, I feel a certain amount of guilt. I keep thinking, well, maybe if he didn't love me so much, maybe he would have had a better ending. Who knows? Who knows? But guilt comes. And then my mother came, very happy. She says, the war has started, and I can take you home now. And can you believe it? She was happy because there was a war. And she says, the Russians are coming, and they're going to be really nice, and they're going to liberate us, and the Jews will be able to come home, and your daddy will come home, and everything will be wonderful. And we said goodbye to this wonderful woman. I remember her standing at the end of her drive, waving a handkerchief and crying. And we went home to our apartment, Well, there was an air raid every hour. Every hour the sirens went on. We had to go to the shelter, to the basement, their cellar, up and down every hour. At one point we stopped going anymore because it was every hour, and we had nothing to eat. There was some half-rotten potatoes that she found in the basement. We were eating that, and it was cold. It was winter, and we had no fuel, and it was pretty miserable. But, you know, it's an amazing thing, hunger. People always think of hunger as, well, you're a little bit hungry, you want to eat. No, it takes over your whole life. Hunger hurts. It hurts your stomach, it hurts your head. Your whole body is completely tuned to wanting to eat something. That's all you can think about. You look in drawers to see in case somebody left a piece of bread somewhere that you didn't get. And your whole being, I mean, you smell funny, and your whole being is concentrated on being hungry. It's a horrible feeling, and you tremble because you're weak. And as this went on, we stopped going to the cellar because there was no point anymore. The bombs were falling. And we saw a cart go in front of the house. It was some people's pathetic belongings. And the horse dropped in front of our house. And the man kicked the horse, but the horse was obviously dead. So he came and took the cart away and left the horse there. And within minutes, people came from all over with knives and dishes, and they started to skin this animal. And it was very, very cold. And I remember as they pulled the hide from this dead horse, it was kind of steaming. And everybody was cutting bits of this horse, and they even took bones to make soup. And we all ate this horse. And everybody was almost rejoicing that we had a piece of meat to eat. And I remember, you know, I remember the taste of it even, but, you know, I love horses. I just buried my old horse here in New Hampshire at age 30. I would never eat a horse. But when you're hungry, you can eat anything because you have to survive somehow. And the war kept on going, and the Russians started coming across the river. We overlooked the river, and the river was frozen, and they were coming down one embankment and up the other on this side, and they were being machine gunned. And they kept coming in waves and waves, all linking arms and singing. They were always singing. They must have been drunk. Nobody's that brave to walk into machine gun fire. And they were coming over again, and more of them, and being shot. And eventually the corpses built up so high we couldn't see the river anymore. And then the people on our side stopped shooting. I don't know what happened. They ran away or they ran out of bullets. And then we were under Russian occupation. Well, that was not warm and fuzzy like my mother said. It wasn't. They were raping the women. They were killing anybody who was a man or an older boy. And, you know, we couldn't go out. We still had no food. And all the women from the area were hiding in my mother's house because she managed to make a false wall in her bathroom. And they were all cowering in there, terrified. They couldn't go out. And so my mother decided at this point to take matters into her own hands, and she decided to go and visit the commanding officer. So she made herself look old. She was a pretty young woman, so obviously she had to do something about that. And she wore an old gray dress and put a pillow under it on her back to look like a hunchback. She had white chalk on her hair. She blackened her teeth, and she drew some lines with some charcoal. And she put a scarf on, and she hunched over with a cane, and she was hobbling around like some old woman. And she went and she found the local commanding officer. And to her surprise, the commanding officer was a young woman. By this time, the Russians lost so many people in the war that they were promoting young people. And this young woman was a commander. And my mother said to her, "Listen, I'm a dressmaker. Come to my house, I will make you a beautiful dress." And the woman came. My mother said, that uniform you're wearing is not very flattering. You come to my house, all this through an interpreter. And the woman came, and my mother took a drape off one of the windows that still had a drape on, and she wrapped it around her and made her a lovely dress. And then she brought other Russian soldier ladies. And suddenly we had food. We had chickens, and we had eggs and butter and bread and even a piece of chocolate. And everybody was eating, and everybody got sick, because when you first eat after hunger, your body can't take it. Eventually, everybody calmed down and started eating small amounts to get us used to eating again. And everybody was quite happy at this point, but still they couldn't go out because the streets were dangerous. The Russians were collecting watches. They had this mania of wristwatches. Obviously, they didn't have them before. And so they would have them up and down their arms, wristwatches, both arms. And I still remember the two words that they were yelling the whole time. One was "Davai chas," which give me a watch, and the other was "Davai barishnya," which means give me a woman. Though that, in that order, watch first. And they were pretty brutal, but at this point my mother asked for a guard. So we got a guard. His name was Ivan. He was a captain, again, he's very young, can't have been more than 17, tall, skinny, young, blonde boy. And he had an adjutant who was an older gentleman who constantly, a fat old man who constantly played the accordion. And these two were drunk all the time. They drank anything. They drank meth, they drank cologne, they drank anything. But you know, they were happy drunks. There's two kinds of drunks. There's awful drunks and happy drunks. But these were happy drunks. And I loved them. I thought they were great. They taught me Russian dances, and they were always singing and Russian songs, and they would take pot shots at the moldings on the ceiling, which I thought was very funny. And then when it got cold, they burnt our antique furniture in the stove. And altogether, they were a bit unruly, but I liked them. And one day, Ivan decided to bring my mother a gift. And you know, a goose liver was the biggest gift you could give a Hungarian in those days. And it was a big delicacy. And he brought this goose liver wrapped in newspaper, but it was still bloody. So she decided, he decided to wash it before he gave it to her. So he took this goose liver, and because where he came from, they didn't have running water, he put it in the toilet to wash. And as he's washing it in the toilet, he realizes there's not enough water, so he pulls the chain, the liver goes away, he shoots the toilet. So that was him, but he was nice. He really was. But one day I was sick, and he brought me a gift, and it was something wrapped in white paper. And I remember unwrapping this thing, and it was an orange. I had never seen an orange before, because where I come from, people didn't import fruit. You ate what grew. And this orange came out of this paper like the rising sun, and that odor it had, it was wonderful. You have no idea what an orange meant to a child who had been starving. It was incredible. And then my mother took pieces of it and gave me some to eat, and then she candied the rest because I could only eat it when I was sick. And I wanted to be sick all the time because this orange meant such a lot to me. And you know, to this day, there's always an orange in my house. I went to a school where I had spoken before, and they had an orange for me on the music stand. I thought it was very sweet. And then these Russians went away. I think they went out of town into a different area. And life started sort of returning to normal. My mother had a hard time making ends meet because nobody was buying dresses, but she was able to sew dresses for people, for food, you know, like she'd make a dress for a pound of butter and for some meat. We always had enough to eat. And one day she said to me, listen, there's some trains coming back, and some of the people will be coming back. By this time, we heard about concentration camps, but of course nobody believed it because it was incomprehensible. They couldn't believe that a country like Germany, which had the most civilized people in the world, the music and the art and everything, they would not be killing people at such a scale. We thought everybody just went to a work camp or something. And so we went to the railway station. And I remember my mother washed my hair and made it all nice. And I put on a nice dress, and so did she. And, you know, I was so excited. I thought, will Daddy recognize me? Will he be proud of me? Because I'm bigger now. And we go to the railway station, and the train draws in, and we're holding up a picture of my father, asking people, have you seen this man? 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 And eventually the train empties and my daddy isn't on it, so we both start crying and we walk home holding hands, sobbing. And my mother says, well, there's 2 more trains. Daddy will be on the next train. He's coming back. I didn't believe that Daddy wasn't coming back to me. So we go the next day and we hold up the picture and we're waiting for Daddy, and there's no Daddy, but there's all these people coming off the trains, and they scare me because they look like ghosts. They are in rags, and you can't tell if they're men or women. They have no hair. They're full of sores. They smell bad. They shuffle. They don't walk. And my mother starts gathering them and taking them to our house and bathing them and giving them clothes, hers for the women and my father's for the men. And I don't like all these people coming to my house. They scare me. And I hide in a corner under a curtain, and I'm listening to them talking, and I hear them talking about the camps. And I'm horrified because I think, oh my God, maybe my daddy was hurt. What happened to my daddy? Where's my daddy? And, you know, nobody believed it. And when these people came back, people still thought, well, maybe this is just part of what happened, but this couldn't be everywhere. And these poor people were telling us stories, which I will not repeat. You've all learned what happened in concentration camps. So we go the 3rd day, and we go holding up the picture, asking anybody who's seen this man. And a man comes to my mother and says, don't wait for him, he's dead. And she says, what do you mean he's dead? How do you know he's dead? He says, I saw him. What happened to him? Never mind, he's dead. That's all I can tell you. I saw his body. And she says to him, well, who are you? How do you know who I am? She says. And he says, don't you recognize me? And she says, no, who are you? Apparently it was a friend of the family, but he was in such bad shape. And she didn't recognize him. He was half dead. His hands were all broken. When he went to Auschwitz, he was taken with his family. He used to have a hotel casino where my parents used to play cards Sunday nights. And he was also a violinist. And he told us that when the camp commander found out that he was a violinist, they broke all his fingers and didn't set them. He had claws, not hands. And he was taken with his wife and his little daughter, age 11. Her name was Dita, which is Judith for short. She was a happy little girl. She used to sing and dance. She played musical instruments. She wanted to be an actress when she grew up. And she was 11 years old. And she and the mother, when they got to the railway station in Auschwitz, when they were unloading the trains, automatically the mother and the child were sent to one side to go to the gas chambers. And the father went to the other side to go to work. And he said to one of the guards, where are they going? And the guard pointed at a chimney that was spewing smoke. He says, that's where they're going. But of course, he didn't understand because we didn't know what went on. He understood later. And this poor man was completely broken because his little girl was gone. And the horror of that. And the guilt that he survived. And he went to see their housekeeper where they left all the worldly goods. And she opens the door wearing his wife's dress. And she looks him up and down and she says, well, I suppose you didn't all die. And she says, the Russians took everything, and she slams the door in his face. So he came back to us, excuse me. He had nothing. I mean, he had nothing. He was totally broken. And he stayed with us. And over time, somehow out of two broken families, we managed to cobble together a new family. But he never became my father. He was always my stepfather. And I was never his daughter because Dita was his daughter. At this point, he brought his old Jewish mother from Romania to live with us, and my mother brought my Jewish grandmother to live with us, the Catholic one. And these two fought for my soul. It was terrible. I was dragged to church on Sunday, synagogue on Saturday, church, synagogue, church, synagogue. These women were battling for my soul. And, you know, each of them told me that the other one's God is not really very much use, and I should listen to them. And my Catholic grandmother made me get on my knees every night and pray to the Virgin Mary, because my mother kept marrying Jews and she was going to hell. I remember the priest, oh, never mind, that was pretty bad. But I was about, I would say about 8 or 9, when my stepfather told me how my father died, because he was present. We never told my mother. There was no need for that. Apparently, my father and another man from town stole a piece of bread because they were starving, and they were caught. And the camp commander decided to make an example of them, so they stripped them both naked, and this was cold winter, beat them half to death with iron bars, and put each of them in a dog kennel in the big place where all the prisoners had to come every morning to be counted. It was like a big field. It was called the Appellplatz. And they left them there in a dog kennel, and it took my father 3 days and 2 nights to die. And when I heard this, I became very, very, very bitter. I wanted revenge. I was completely obsessed by revenge. I was thinking horrible thoughts of what I would do to people who did this. And I would flay them alive, and I would I'd take a hammer and knock nails in their heads. I would cut their tongues out. I would burn them. It was horrible. I was completely obsessed. I was sick with rage and revenge. And, you know, it took me 50 years to stop hating. I don't hate anymore. I don't hate at all. I don't forgive because I can't forgive someone else's death. I always tell my kids, if somebody kills me, don't you dare forgive them, I'll haunt you. Because it's for me to forgive my death. You can't forgive my death. Therefore, I can't forgive my father's death. I can only forgive people what they do to me. That's mine. And the thing is that, you know, if your heart is completely full of revenge and hatred, there's no room for anything else. And slowly I managed to wean myself away from the nastiness, and I filled my soul completely with love. People say to me, so what's your religion? And I think, well, what's my religion? I suppose love. But of course I'm a Christmas Jew because I still have a Christmas tree. So that's what happened to me there. But I think of all the extinguished potential. Out of the millions of people they killed, and not just Jews, but lots of other people, how many artists, how many philosophers, how many scientists, how many geniuses did they end? I mean, how many generations of clever people are gone, missing? And I feel bad that I don't have anywhere, I have nothing. I have nowhere to go to mourn my father. There's no grave. The people in my life that were taken will only be remembered by me. And when I'm dead, little Dita, this little girl, will not be remembered by anybody because there's no one else to remember her, because she's just become ashes. And that makes me very sad. But on the other hand, you know, I'm very fortunate, and I'm a very happy person. Believe it or not, I'm happy. And in fact, I got a letter from a kid from one of the schools said, dear Mrs. Preston, I'm sorry to tell you I don't feel sorry for you. And that was such a compliment. I don't want to be felt sorry for. I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. And that's a big deal, because when anybody bullies you, you don't give in, you don't become a victim, you have to survive it. Because I feel that because I'm here and survived, I won. Hitler lost and I won. I have 4 sons, and every time I gave birth to one of them, it was giving the finger to Hitler. It was great. And I now have a very nice multicultural family. I have 4 sons and 4 granddaughters, and they range from half African American, half Mexican, half Chinese, and I even have a half German one. When my eldest son came to see me and told me he's getting married to this wonderful Canadian actress, and I was so happy, and he says, well, there's a slight problem. I said, what problem can there be? She's lovely. Oh, no, you don't understand. Her father was in the German army. So I swallowed, and I swallowed, and I said, that's okay. We don't visit the sins of the father on the children. And she's a wonderful girl, and I remember holding the daughter, a newborn daughter, in my arms with the tears just streaming and thinking, here is the granddaughter of a perpetrator and the victim. And this is how it has to be. We have to go forward. We cannot go back. We have to go forward and celebrate everything that's good about it. And I speak for the dead because, you know, there's no one left to speak for them. I'm obviously the only one in my family. And I feel that, you know, 10% of people are really wonderful. 10% of people are kind and good. 10% are pretty awful. 80% are sheep. It's the sheep who scare me. Because the sheep will follow the bully. It's much easier to follow the bully. All you have to do is just stand there, maybe giggle, or just do nothing. But if you follow the good, you have to actually do something, try to do something good for someone. You have to be counted. You have to try and stand up to make a difference. You know, don't look away when something happens. And I was watching a documentary, the wonderful man who was the prosecutor at Nuremberg. He's now 90-something, but he's still sharp and bright. And he was telling us a story on the documentary about his father, who was a very simple immigrant, a tailor, and he sat down his 2 children every night at dinner and said to them, what have you done for humanity today? And they had to come up with something. Oh, I helped an old lady across the street. I picked up garbage. I fed a dog. I gave a man a penny. Something. They had to do something for humanity every day. And that really resonates with me, because I think that's the only thing we can do, is do one small thing. Sometimes people come up to me and say, well, what can I, as a kid in school, do? Go sit with a kid that nobody wants to sit with. Open a door for someone. Be kind. You know, when you walk down the street and you stumble on a rock, you don't think, oh, I'm an idiot, clumsy idiot. No. Why is there a rock on the street? The municipality didn't do their job. It's not me, it's them. It's always like scapegoating. And you know, we have a fear of strangers, because that's why there's prejudice, because if you're uneducated and you don't know why somebody is the way they are, you're afraid of them. Everybody has stranger fear. And we have prejudice against anyone who doesn't fit into our social construct. When you think about it, the Holocaust was really bullying on steroids. It really was. And you can see what severe consequences it had. And if you start off with small things like hating the other now, it can escalate. It can escalate, and it can end in tragedy. I mean, question yourselves, who in your life is the other? People of different religion, economic background, immigrants, blacks, straight, gays, homeless. Who is the other in your life? And try to get to know the other, because we are all very, very similar. And there are genocides going on today. There are genocide in Syria, there are genocides going on in Africa, and it's always the fear of the other and not accepting the other. And I truly believe in the power of education. I truly believe that as long as you're educated, you can save the world. And I really like your generation. I think your generation, you know, like every few generations, there's a great generation. They talk about World War II's great generation. Well, you guys are it now, because the one before you is pretty awful. You guys are the new generation, because you are different. You're not as prejudiced. You're not as stuck in your ways. And you know, people blame you for being on your phones all the time. Well, keep doing it, because it seems to do a lot of good, because you're much more open. You see the world around you, and you don't only talk about, oh, when I'm older, I want to be rich and famous. You talk about the environment. You care what happens. You don't want to live in your parents' basement when you're 55, which at the moment looks like you may have to. Maybe not all of you, but some of you. And, you know, you have to embrace the power of one. Look what this one woman did for me and my children. I mean, she saved me, she saved my children, my grandchildren, and who knows how many people after that. A whole generation of people. The power of one simple Christian peasant girl who did the right thing, who had the bravery to do the right thing. And we are all responsible. We are all our brother's keepers. We're responsible for each other. And all you can do is love each other seriously. I found a quote that I'm going to read to you. It was from Churchill. I saw it on a program, funnily enough, called The Crown. There was a thing that he said during the World War II. Hear this, young men and women everywhere, and proclaim it far and wide. The earth is yours, and the fullness thereof. Be kind but fierce. You are needed now more than ever before. Take up the mantle of change, for this is your time. He said it, I didn't. Thank you very much.